Our top story, after mounting backlash globally, the British Broadcasting Corporation has given in. Gary Lineker will be back anchoring the network's football highlights program. Lineker had criticized the British government's migration policy on his personal social media page. But what followed was nothing less than a mutiny. Lineker was sacked from his position and the BBC was forced to axe much of its sports coverage. But the people had already chosen their side. Lineker is a former England soccer captain. He is BBC's highest paid presenter and has been presenting Match of the Day programme since 1999. Soon after the sacking, other presenters and football pundits refused to continue without Lineker. What followed was just a 20-minute sports coverage, hours of commentary replaced with sounds of the crowd, and a theme song scraped from the broadcast. Soon after the announcement of his return, Lineker took to Twitter saying the UK remains a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people. The row has also prompted a review of existing social media guidelines with a particular focus on how it applies to freelancers outside news and current affairs. However, for the time being, the old guidelines stay in place. Gary Lineker will return on Saturday. Other commentators have also hinted at rejoining the broadcast. Lately, the BBC has faced criticism from the Conservative and Labour parties about how neutral it really is. The media firm is mostly funded by the government through TV licence fees, and many believe this is what complicates the situation.
I've got a train to catch. Morning, Gary.
All right, for more on this, we're now joined by Nigel Fletcher. He is a writer and political commentator. He joins us from London. Mr. Fletcher, thanks for speaking to WION. Now, a U-turn has been made by the BBC after the massive global outrage following their decision to remove Gary Lineker. But do you think the damage to the broadcaster's reputation has been done and will probably be very difficult to undo?
Yes, I think that's right. I think the BBC has made the best of a bad situation by reinstating Gary Lineker and announcing that they're going to review their social media guidelines. But I think it's important to recognise why this is so important. The BBC is essentially a publicly funded broadcaster. It's funded by the licence fee, which is a requirement for people to pay if they own a television in the UK, and it has under its charter a requirement to be politically impartial, and so that's why it's so concerning, I think, to the BBC when they have one of its most prominent broadcasters criticising government policy. But I think that what we've seen is a real grey area in terms of how that works in practice, because you do have people who are freelancers appearing on the BBC. There have been examples given of Alan Sugar, Lord Sugar, who presents The Apprentice. There are other people, until fairly recently. Andrew Neil was one of the leading broadcasters in the political team, and he had very firm political convictions that he expressed in other mediums. So I think this is a difficulty for the BBC, that they have to strike a balance here between, on the one hand, ensuring that they are seen as impartial and that their broadcasters are seen as impartial, but then on the other hand, allowing people the freedom to express their views outside of the BBC. This wasn't something that Gary Lineker had said on the BBC, of course. This was something he'd said on his own Twitter channel. So this is, I think, a difficult one for the BBC, but I think they've had to try and get themselves out of the problem that's been created.
All right, a difficult one for the BBC. Now, recently, you must be aware, India too hit out at the British Broadcasting Corporation over certain freedom issues that it has raised. Do you believe the BBC's critics have got their pound of flesh with this entire episode?
Well, I think this is the real concern for the BBC in terms of its public support, and also from the political establishment. We saw over the weekend Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader of the opposition, being quite strident in his criticism of the BBC for the action they'd taken on this issue, and that goes alongside criticism that has long been in existence from the right of the political spectrum, from conservatives who often accuse the BBC of being biased to the left. So I think that the problem that BBC has got here is that when you're trying to strike a balance to show that you're impartial, the risk is that you end up on matters like this, upsetting both sides of the political spectrum. And that's a real political issue when the BBC's future and its funding arrangements are constantly under scrutiny. But I think on this one, that what they will have been concerned about is that it's not just those on the right who are opposed to the BBC and its funding model who have been attacking them, but it's also in terms of their handling now being on the left as well who have attacked their judgment. And questions, of course, raised about the political impartiality of the BBC's chairman, who's been embroiled in something of a controversy over his relationship to the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So this is something which will continue, and he, particularly the chairman, is going to be under increasing pressure in the aftermath of this controversy.
Well, there are growing calls for the chairman's resignation, and many would say that the BBC has dug itself into a hole with this entire controversy. But on that note, Nigel Fletcher, thank you for speaking to WION.
Thank you.